sound is clear. So, for those of you that were with us last week, we saw a little bit about the controversy of going up to HaBayit. Rabbi Gorin was a strong advocate in favor of going up to HaBayit, as he says in his book. The reason was to assert the Jewish ownership of HaBayit, the Jewish sovereignty of HaBayit. We saw that the chief rabbin in 1967 put out a statement opposing going up to HaBayit, and that seems to be definitely the position of the Haredi poskim, and also a great deal of the Tilumu poskim. We gave some of the names, those that are in favor and those that are against. You can refer back to last year. Some of the issues that we talked about was based, if you look at last week's reference sheet, okay, it's based on the Psukim in Parshas Korach, where the people got very upset with Moshe. They said that it isn't fair. He says the people, they complained to Moshe, the people could too easily cross over the boundary until which they're allowed to go until. If in the last week's reference sheet, give me a moment. Apologize. Number 35 in last week's parsha sheet. Number 32. Vayomer b'nei Yisrael Moshe leimahen govanu avandu kulanu avadnu. We're all destined to die. Kol hakar v'kar v'mishkan Hashem yamos hem tamnu l'gvaya. Are we destined to all die? Anybody who gets too close, it's too easy to overstep the boundary. And that's why Hashem responded by telling Moshe that Aaron and his descendants would be shomrim, would be guards around the area of the Beit HaMikdash to make sure that nobody would overstep their boundary. As we saw the Medrash Haggadah 33 in last week's reference sheet, HaYisrael mitra'amim ala davar zeh shitne kadosh baruch hu shem mishkan. The Jewish people demanded that there be shomrim around the area of the Beit HaMikdash. So, if we're darshin in time to call a chumrah, which is the position of the Chatzim Sofer and the Chesed La'alofim and other poskim, that you can take the reasoning of the Torah, not to apply it leniently, but to apply it stringently, so that would be a basis to forbid going up to HaBayit as long as there are no shomrim. I did say in last week's parsha that it would definitely be a good thing if the Jewish people could fund putting up shomrim there up at HaBayit, so that would make going up to HaBayit much less problematic. It would preclude the concern about people accidentally walking onto the place of the Beis HaMikdash. It's one of the mitzvahs aseh. We said that the student of the Avnei Nezer, the author of the Mishnas La'Arba Yaakov, his name was Reb Meshel Gelbstein. He wrote to his teacher, the Avnei Nezer. The tshuva appears in Chelik Yerdeh, Simin Taf Mem Tet, where the Avnei Nezer agrees with him that certainly one of the reasons that we put shomrim up on HaBayit or around the Beit HaMikdash was to make sure that nobody would overstep their boundary, and indeed there is a reason to do that. The Avnei Nezer discussed some of the political concerns about putting up shomrim. At the time, Israel was under the rulership of the Turks, the Sultan. I'd like to discuss another issue, right, that I believe we mentioned briefly in last week's shir, something that's been overlooked. If you look at your reference sheet, part number 5, number 45 in your reference sheet, this is a Tosefta in Masechet Kelim, Perek Aleph Halach Yudalad. The Tosefta says, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, Kishem she'ein zavin v'zavot v'nidot yoldot nichnasim l'HaBayit kach mishkavan u'mishkavan kiyotze behen. A very important halacha that pertains to going up to HaBayit. Rabbi Shimon says, just as a zav, we discuss what that is, a certain illness, a certain discharge from the male member, an abnormal discharge from the male member, zavot, a woman that sees bleeding that's not part of her menstrual cycle, nidot, any woman that had been a nidah, yoldot, any woman that had given birth, they're not allowed to go up to HaBayit. Just a quick recap, HaBayit, according to the Mishnah in Midot, Perek Aleph, Mishnah Beis, HaBayit is an area 500 by 500 amot. Okay, it's a fairly small area, not very large. It's about 250 by 250 meters. That's the area of HaBayit. The area of, to go up to HaBayit, one must not be a zav or a zava or a nida or a yoledet. In order to purify oneself from any of these impurities, one has to go to the mikvah. So therefore, even when we go up to HaBayit today, people who do go up to HaBayit are very strict about going to the mikvah. Additionally, the Gemara in Pesachim told us that zav also includes a balkari, anybody that had a seminal discharge, whether by having relations with a woman or otherwise. He also needs to go to the mikveh to purify himself. Now, to go to the area of the Beit HaMikdash, which according to the Mishnah in Midot, Hey Mishnah Aleph, that's an area of 187 by 135 amma. Okay. Now, in front of the area of the Beit HaMikdash, there's an area of the Ezrat Nashim. The Ezrat Nashim was 135 by 135 amma, as the Bartanura in the first parak of Kalim points out, that if we're Tmei Mesim, if we have come in contact with a corpse, then we're not allowed to go into the Ezrat Nashim, but it's only a rabbinic prohibition. So just to make it clear, if somebody's been to the mikvah, a kosher mikvah, and he's purified himself from being a nida, zav, zava, or balkari, he can go up to the entire HaBayit. There is a rabbinic prohibition against going up to the area of the Ezrat Nashim, which is 135 by 135 amma. And if one goes into the area of the Azara, the Beit HaMikdash, which is 187 by 135 amma, he incurs a karet punishment. Okay, how do we ascertain where these areas are today? The Radva says that there isn't a doubt in the world that the area of the Kodesh HaKadoshim is where the Dome of the Rock stands today. Above that, we call the Even Ashtiyah, that rock, it could be seen. If that's the area of the Beit Hamik, if that's the area of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, we could very easily then calculate exactly where everything else is based on the Mishnayot of Midot. Now, I want to now get to the point that I think is generally overlooked too often, which is part 5, which is the Tosefta. And the Tosefta, as we read, says that Reb Shimon says, just as the Zav and the Zavah and the Nida and the Yoledet may not go up to HaBayit, also Mishkavan and Moshavan, that means the items upon which they sat, or the items upon which they lied, also assume a Tumah. It's called Tumas Hesed. They also assume Tumah, so therefore even their clothing may not go up to HaBayit. Now, if one is a Balkari and he sits on clothing, or he wears clothing, that there's no issue with those clothing going up to HaBayit. The issue is because of the clothing that a Nida may have sat on. Okay? So therefore, as we'll soon see, all clothing today is assumed to have the Tumah that comes from a Nida, what we call Tumat Mishkav. Now, I was actually quite surprised to see that the poskim don't seem to pay any attention, that even today's day and age, you would also have to toivel, you would also have to immerse the clothing into the mikveh before going up to HaBayit. I looked quite a bit to find if anybody pays any attention to this. I didn't find anything significant. I found one passing reference about somebody says, perhaps we don't rule like this Tosefta. I don't think that that's an acceptable position. If you look at number 46 on your reference sheet, again, the same reference sheet that you received last week, number 46, it's the, if any of you learned Daf Yomi, you will have learned the end of Shkalim. The end of Shkalim, the Yerushalmi says, Reb Shimon or Machal Mashkishim en mivim legimel machanot. It's actually today's or yesterday's Daf Yomi that a Mitzara has to leave the Ir Choma. He has to leave the walled city. The Mitzara has to be distanced farther than any other person, and he has to be outside the city. There, the Yerushalmi brings the sheet of Reb Shimon that says, not only does the Mitzara need to leave all 3 camps, also the clothing and the food and the mashka, the drink of the Mitzara, also needs to leave all 3 camps. The Gra, there at the end of Yerushalmi, he says that Reb Shimon is according with his reasoning, that's mentioned in the Tosefta that we read, that just as Reb Shimon requires that the clothing of a Nida be outside HaBayit, so too Reb Shimon also required that the food and drink, and presumably the clothing of a Mitzara, needs to be outside the walled city. The Gemara then Yerushalmi says that they still accord with Reb Shimon, so clearly we do accept this position of Reb Shimon, so therefore I would strongly draw attention to people that if they do go up to HaBayit, they should make every effort that they should also immerse their clothing. Okay, I don't know if you would like to do it in one shot, you would have to make sure that your clothing is only put on loosely so that the water could get to the clothing, so that the clothing and the person is properly immersed in the mikvah. Now, why do we assume that our clothing is tameh? That's the Gemara in Chagiga, Daf Yudchet, number 49, on your reference sheet. This is Big De Amertz Midrash Leprushin. Again, in the times of the Chazal, in the times of the Gemara and the Mishnah, Am Yisrael was divided, many groups, but more or less there was a division between the Am Haaretz, the laymen, the common folk, and the Prushin. The Prushin were the Talmidei Chacham, the Torah scholars. So the Torah scholars had to assume that the clothing of Am Haaretz was tamei. Why is that so? See number 50 in the Mishnah in Mai. The Mishnah in Mai says that if somebody would like to be a chaver means to say he has the status of a parush, he could be trusted that everything that he owns is pure, he has to comply to a certain list of requirements. One of them is that he's not allowed to host an Am Haaretz with the Am Haaretz's clothing. That's what the Mishnah there says. He's not allowed to be a guest at the house of an Am Haaretz, neither is he allowed to host an Am Haaretz when the Am Haaretz is wearing his own clothing. So if you'd like to invite an Am Haaretz, you'd say, please step into the dressing room before you come in, change clothing, and then you're welcome to come in. Says the Bartanura, based on the Gemara, why is it that you cannot host the Am Haaretz with clothing? So the reason is because the clothing of an Am Haaretz is assumed to have the Tumas Midras. Why? Because his wife presumably sat on the clothing or at some point imparted the Tumah into the clothing. Okay, so in today's day and age, all of our clothing certainly is no better than the clothing of an Am Haaretz in the times of the Mishnah, because we don't comply with any of the halachot of Tumah and Tahara today. So therefore, all our clothing is assumed to be tamei, as we've seen in the Mishnah in Demai, and therefore it would need to be immersed into a mikvah before going up to HaBayit. I'm not sure why this is not widely practiced. If anybody knows of a reason why it's not widely practiced in today's day and age, I would love to hear it. I would be very happy to hear exactly what the reason is. Okay? Now, I'd just like to mention another point, that, if somebody needs to go up at the HaBayit, he should not go to the area of the Ezrat Nashim. Last week I showed you a booklet that color coding marks the different areas. I'm sure anybody who would like to can get access to it, and I'm sure it's available online, where you can see the different color codings of areas onto HaBayit which you may go, and areas which you may not go. So we don't go into the Ezrat Nashim. There's a rabbinic prohibition for somebody who's a tamei met, somebody who's been defiled by a corpse. He's not allowed to go to the Ezrat Nashim. If he goes into the Azara, it's a chiv karet. But there's a rabbinic prohibition against going into the area of the Ezrat Nashim. So we won't go into, and even people who go up to HaBayit do not go to the area of the Ezrat Nashim. Now, what if a soldier needs to go to the area of the Ezrat Nashim because of Koach Nefesh or what have you? So then he would have to, if he doesn't, if it's Pekuach Nefesh and it's not urgent to go the same day that he goes to the mikvah, he should wait for nightfall. Now, the halacha is that somebody who went to the mikvah to purify from some tumah, on that very day he has the status of a Tful Yom. A Tful Yom still carries some limited level of tumah. If he's a Kohen, for example, he's not allowed to eat truma. And one of the limitations of a Tful Yom is that he's not allowed to go into the Ezrat Nashim. Okay? If you want to see the source for that, part 3, number 25, on the reference sheet of last week, the pasuk says, "Vayamad Yehoshaphat b'kal Yehuda v'Yerushalayim b'Beit Hashem l'fnei chatzer chadasha." Yehoshaphat made a new chatzer, a new courtyard. So the Gemara in Yevamot Daf Zayin, it's also Gemara in Pesachim Daf Tzadi Beis. My chatzer chadash shechitzu b'davar. He added a new prohibition. Va'amad, they said, Tful Yom lo yikanis lamach leviyah. Tful Yom may not go into the Levite camp. If you read the Gemara superficially, you might think that he prohibited a Tful Yom from going up into the entire Machane Leviyah, which is the entire HaBayit. If you read the Mishnah, you might think that a Tful Yom, somebody who's gone to mikvah that very day to be purified, cannot go up onto the entire HaBayit. But Tosfot there already points out, all the other Rishonim point out, and that's also the ruling of the Rambam in Chot Biyot HaMikdash, Per Gimel, Halacha Hey, number 27, in your reference sheet, that a Tful Yom is not prohibited from going up to the entire HaBayit. He's only prohibited from going up to the area of the Ezrat Nashim. Okay, so therefore it has some relevance to today's day and age. If, let's say, you have a soldier that needs to go up to the Ezrat Nashim, then there would be a benefit for him, or maybe he should wait for Herav Shemesh, right? So if, let's say, he needs to go up to HaBayit on a Monday for the Pekuach Nefesh or whatever other reason, if he needs to go up to the area of the Ezrat Nashim, so what he should do is he should toivel on Sunday, let nightfall of Sunday pass, and then on Monday he will be allowed to go into the area of the Ezrat Nashim if he needs to for B'Kuach Nefesh. Okay, because it said that otherwise you should not go up to the area of the Ezrat Nashim, because there's a rabbinic prohibition for somebody that's Tamei Made to go up to the Ezrat Nashim. So I would just like to give another quick review, a quick summary of everything that we've learned. HaBayit is 500 by 500 Amma. Anybody that is a Nida, a Zav, a Zava, or Yoledet, or Balkari may not go up to the entire HaBayit. So therefore, people who go up to HaBayit, if this is a woman, she should make sure that she's passed her menstruating cycle and she's been to the mikvah. She ceased to menstruate and she's been to the mikvah. Anybody that had been a Balkari, had a seminal mission by relation to the wife or otherwise, they should go to the mikvah before going up to HaBayit. That's the first requirement. The second requirement is one needs to be absolutely sure that he doesn't go to the area of the Beit HaMikdash, the area of the Azar, which is 187 by 135 Amma. If he does, that could incur a karet punishment. If it's done b'mezid, if it's done knowingly, sinfully. There's a rabbinic prohibition also not to go into the area of the Ezrat Nashim, which is 135 by 135 Amma. If somebody does need to go into the area of the Ezrat Nashim, then there's definitely a benefit to go after, if he's able to, and it doesn't, if it doesn't get into the way of Pekuach Nefesh, then he should not go up as a Tful Yom. There's a benefit to wait till nightfall, not to be toiling the same day that he needs to go into the area of the Ezrat Nashim. The main issue of those that oppose going up to HaBayit, which seems to be the majority of the major poskim, is because of the area that you might overstep your boundary, which is, according to the pasuk in Parshas Korach, the very reason that the people demanded that there be shomrim. It would be extremely beneficial if we can put up shomrim today. We would be fulfilling a mitzvah tasei doraita, one of the 613 mitzvahs. We can put up shomrim. I'm not sure if it's being done. One could fulfill this obligation by putting up a fence that clearly marks the area of the Beit HaMikdash, as had been done by Sinai. Sinai, there was the same issue. Hashem had warned Moshe twice before the giving of the Torah, and shortly before the giving of the Torah, to put up a fence to make sure that nobody walks up to the area of Har Sinai. It would definitely be beneficial, and something which I'm not sure why is being neglected today, that the clothing should also go into the mikveh. If anybody has explanation why this is not being fulfilled today, I would love to hear. Now, the next thing that I'd like to get to is the next reference sheet, the newer reference sheet, which discusses whether or not you can make a bracha. If somebody's going up to HaBayit today, he needs to go to the mikveh. Does he make a bracha on the immersion into the mikveh? As we all know, women, whenever they go to the mikveh for their husbands, they make a bracha. The minhag of the Ashkenazi woman is to dunk themselves into the mikveh the first time, and then when they stick their head out, they make a bracha and they dunk themselves again. The minhag of many Sephardi women, that was the ruling of Rabbi Yosef, that going to the mikveh should be, the bracha on going to the mikveh should be made over l'siyatan. The bracha should be made before immersing yourself into the mikveh. So therefore, a woman will cover herself with a robe, make the bracha, then go into the mikveh. Okay? So let's just look at our reference sheet. I hope everybody has the reference sheet, which was sent out by email. If you look at number 1 of the new reference sheet, there's a Gemara in Bracha Daf Chav Bet that says, Nog Alma K'ro Yehuda ben Neser b'divrei Torah. It used to be that the Kanat Ezra had made an enactment that a Balkari, one who had a seminal mission, should not learn Torah and should not pray. So if somebody was a Balkari, he couldn't pray, he couldn't learn Torah. But the Gemara says that the minhag, the custom, has become not like, has been like Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. We no longer conform to the Takan of Ezra, and we say, Ein divrei Torah makablim tuma. The divrei Torah is not something that could become tummy. So even if one is a Balkari, you should learn Torah. According to Tosfot and the Rambam, we no longer are stringent about davening either. There was a shita in the Rishonim of Haigon that said that even though today we learn Torah as a Balkari, but we should not be praying. We should not be saying Tefillah Shemona Esrei as a Balkari. Excuse me just a second. He's calling in here. Hello? Okay, I thought there was somebody calling in for the shir. Forgive me. So basically, the minhag has become that we learn Torah, we daven even when one is a Balkari. Now, there's a Gemara in Pesachim, number 2 on your reference sheet, Tavel va'Allah, when somebody goes into immerse in a mikvah, B'liyatav Omer, he says, Baruch Asher Kedishana b'mitzvayse v'tzivona ala tefillah. Now, the Gemara in Pesachim seems to indicate that the bracha that one makes on immersing in the mikvah is said after one immerses. So, There's a machlokus in the Rishonim. Most Rishonim hold that that's only for a ger. If somebody converts to Judaism, if a non-Jew wants to convert to Judaism, he wants to become a Jew, he needs to go into the mikvah. So he cannot make the bracha before he immerses himself in the mikvah because he's not Jewish at that point in time. So the only option that he has is to make the bracha afterwards. But other people, Jewish people that need to go to the mikvah, if it's a nidar or for whatever other reason, it's a kohen that needs to go to the mikvah so that he could eat truma. So then he makes the bracha before going in. That's the opinion of most Rishonim. But we, the Ashkenazim, like the Ramah, that say that all tefillot, right, all immersions, we always make the bracha after the immersion. Okay, so Tosfot, there's an interesting Tosfot there on Pesachim Daf Zayin Amud Beis that says that even in today's day and age, if somebody's a Balkari and he wants to go to the mikvah, he wants to be stringent, not to learn Torah, not to daven whilst being a Balkari, so then mutter levarech, Tosfot says that he's allowed to make a bracha on the immersion. Okay, the tour number 4, right, brings the Reb Sadia Gaon. The Reb Sadia Gaon said that when we go to the mikvah on Erev Yom Kippur, right, it's the widespread minhag to go to the mikvah before Yom Kippur or before any of the regalim. Rav Sadia Gaon says that when he comes out of the mikvah, he should make a bracha on the tefillah. Now the Tur says that the Rosh disagreed strongly with Rav Sadia Gaon. He said there's no reason to make a bracha on the tefillah, on the immersion that we make on Erev Yom Kippur or any other Erev Yom Tov. Says the Rosh, Shalom Matzinu v'Talmud Remezot Tefillah. We don't find anywhere in the Gemara that says that one needs to go to the mikvah on Erev Yom Kippur. It's a minhag, and therefore we should not make a bracha. Okay, just like the Gemara in Sukkah Mendalet says, we don't make a bracha when we take the Hoshanot, when we take the Aravot on Hoshana Rabbah, because it's only a minhag. So, and there's neither reason to make a bracha on the mikvah because of Rabbi Yitzchak and Rosh Hashanah Tezayin that says Chayv Adam Latar Atzma B'Regel. A person needs to purify himself before the regel, before the Yom Tov. He says that's talking about paraduma, right, being sprinkled with the ashes of the paraduma on the 3rd and the 7th day. But the going into the mikvah that we do on Erev Yom Tov or on Erev Yom Kippur is only a minhag, and there's no reason to make a bracha. So how do we explain Rav Sadia Gaon? Why did Rav Sadia Gaon say that when one goes to the mikvah on Erev Yom Kippur, he can make a bracha? So I most prefer the explanation of the Tiferet Tzvi, number 5 on the reference sheet. That's Reb Tzadok HaKohen MiLublin. Reb Tzadok HaKohen MiLublin was famous as a Hasidic master. However, he was also an important posek. He has the Sheila Teshuva Tiferet Tzvi. And he says that Reb Sadia Gaon actually holds that whenever one chooses to go to the mikvah to purify himself from being a Balkari, he had a seminal mission, he'd like to purify himself from that impurity, even though he doesn't need to, it's not compulsory, but if he's doing it as an optional action, then he's allowed to make a bracha. Okay, that's the shita of Reb Sadia Gaon. And he says this is also the explanation of the Tosfot that we saw in Pesachim Daf Zayin that says if somebody chooses to be stringent and he'd like to go to the mikveh to purify himself from keri, then he's allowed to make a bracha. So therefore, even when we do something optional, but if what we do achieves something, that would justify making a bracha. That's not like the Bach that says the reason why Reb Sadia Gaon held that you make a bracha before going to the mikvah is because of the obligation to purify oneself from the regel. But in reality, according to Reb Sadia Gaon, any time during the year that one chooses to purify himself from the keri tumah, he would be allowed to make a bracha. But says Reb Tzadok HaKohen that typically they did not go to the mikvah until Yom Tov came along. All year round they would stay about keri. That was the common custom. It was only before the regalim or before Yom Kippur that they made the decision that they would like to purify themselves from keri. So it happened to be that they only made the bracha beforehand. But, again, as we explained already, that if they chose to go to the mikveh any time during the year to purify themselves from keri, they can make a bracha. So why did the Rosh disagree? Right? The Rosh disagreed because he said that it's not an obligation. According to the Rosh, unlike Reb Sadia Gaon, one can only make a bracha on an immersion that is compulsory. Now, when one goes up to HaBayit, it is certainly compulsory to go to the mikvah. So, by that line of reasoning, one should make a bracha when going into the mikvah for going up to HaBayit. Even though one can choose not to go up to HaBayit, but that's not the point. The point is, if he is going up to HaBayit, then that immersion becomes compulsory. Like the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvot, Asay Kuftet, number 8 on your reference sheet, as the Rambam explains, that if a Kohen would like to eat truma, a Kohen is not obligated to eat truma. But if a Kohen would like to eat truma, and he goes to the mikvah so that he can eat truma, he will make a bracha. Okay, I put that in bold, number 8 from the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvot. Ki zeh din levad shemi sheyirtza sheyitaher. The mitzvah, one of the Targum mitzvahs, is that if one wishes to purify himself, yasakach v'zeh adin hu mitzvah. The mitzvah is to purify oneself if he wishes to do something that requires mikvah. Even though you don't need to go to the mikvah, you can choose not to eat truma, you can choose not to go up to HaBayit, it doesn't make a difference. But the fact that you are choosing to go up to HaBayit, or that the Kohen is choosing to eat truma, and he needs to purify himself to do what he would like to do, he makes a bracha on the mikvah. Again, the Rosh only disagreed with the Psad Yagoin if somebody's purifying himself from being a Balkari when he has no absolute need to. But if one has a need to purify himself from being a Balkari, then he would make a bracha. And that's why number 9 on your reference sheet from the Chashukei Chemed in Yevamos Daf Mem Vav Amud Aleph, Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein, the son-in-law of Rav Eliashiv, he rules there that he talks about a soldier that needs to go up to HaBayit for Pekuach Nefesh. Again, Rav Eliashiv is according with his reasoning that doesn't allow people to go up to HaBayit unless there's a reason for Pekuach Nefesh. But as far as we're concerned, anybody that's going up to HaBayit, whether if you go up to HaBayit even for reasons not of Pekuach Nefesh, or if you don't go up to HaBayit but you need to go up because of Pekuach Nefesh, Rav Zilberstein quotes his father-in-law, Rav Eliashiv, that says you must make a bracha on the mikvah. Obviously, he points out that when doing this immersion, one needs to be strict to do all the things that a woman needs to do when she goes to the mikvah to be with her husband. Namely, you have to make sure there's no chatzitza, you have to clean your fingernails, you have to clean your toenails, you have to make sure there's no knots in your hair, whatever a woman would do. And you also have to make sure that the mikvah that you're going to is kosher even for a nida. Okay? That's something that needs to be ascertained. Okay? Now, there's an interesting point, again, that Reb Tzadok makes, number 10, on your reference sheet. He wants to explain the sheet of Psad Yagoin that you always make a bracha, since going to the mikvah purifies yourself from a Balkari. Now, Reb Tzadok lived in Eastern Europe. In Eastern Europe, nobody was going up to HaBayit, but he wanted to explain the sheet of Psad Yagoin that since going into the mikvah qualifies you to go up to HaBayit, even though you're not actually planning to go up to HaBayit, Reb Psad Yagoin may have held that the reason why you make a bracha when purifying yourself from being a Balkari, not because you're actually planning on going to HaBayit, the fact that it carries the potential, that it qualifies you to go up to HaBayit, that in itself is enough of a reason to go up. And if you look at the tshuva number 10, if you look at the second paragraph, he says, Gam atik shatav l'kari, even in today's day and age, when purifying oneself from kari, from a seminal emission, it qualifies you l'kanes l'HaBayit, afal pishutam emeis, ve'makom habayit yidu hayoim. He says, we know where HaBayit is. It's 500 and 500 amot. He brings from the Sefer Aderet Eli Eliyahu that says that he measured the area of HaBayit, and it actually does equal up to 500 and 500 amot, and therefore we know exactly where the Beit HaMikdash is. Reb Tzadok Kohen also asserts that today we could know where the place of the Beit HaMikdash is, so therefore going to the mikvah does qualify one to go up to HaBayit, and that is enough of a reason to make a bracha. Now the Rosh must have disagreed and said, no, you don't make a bracha unless you're actually planning to do something with the mikvah. Okay? Now Reb Tzadok very cleverly, he compares this disagreement between Reb Tzadok and the Rosh. If somebody decides to go to the mikveh to purify himself from keri, can he make a bracha or not? He compares it to another very interesting case. Somebody is slaughtering an animal, he's shechting an animal that he knows is a treifa, or that he suspects is a treifa. It has a hole in its lungs, it has some feature that renders it a treifa, unfit for consumption. However, even when one slaughters an animal that is a treifa, that is unfit for consumption, the shechita, the slaughtering, does accomplish something, because an animal that was killed by any other way other than shechita, for example, an animal that was electrocuted to death, an animal that's killed, however it is killed, that animal imparts impurity. It's called tumat nevela, it's an ava tuma, and if food touches, for example, if truma touched that dead animal, that truma would be disqualified, it would not be fit for consumption. However, if one takes an animal and slaughters it in a kosher way, he shechs the animal in a way that it should be slaughtered, even though the animal is not kosher because it has a hole in its lungs, but the shechita has accomplished something. It has accomplished that the animal no longer imparts impurity. So the question is, you have this animal, you know that it's not fit for consumption, it has a hole in its lungs. However, shechting it will accomplish that it no longer will impart impurity. So can you make a bracha or not? So we'll soon see it's a disagreement between Rashi and the Arzarua. So he explained, this question is the same thing. If somebody is going to the mikveh to purify himself from keri, he's not planning on going up to HaBayit, but it still accomplishes something that qualifies him to go up to HaBayit. So if you look at the Yerushalmi, number 11 on your reference sheet, so the Yerushalmi raises a question, when do you make a bracha when you do the shechita? So Rav Yochanan said you make the bracha before shechting. That's the common practice today, that before an animal is shechted, they make a bracha. But the Yerushalmi brings another opinion, the opinion of Yossi ben Horai, that says you make the bracha after you shechted. So the Gemara says, why does Rav Yossi ben Horai say that you make the bracha after you shech the animal? So he says, Shema titnabel shchitata, because he might fail to do a good shchita. When he's shechting the animal, he might, his hands might shake, he might somehow disqualify the shechita. So the Gemara says, if that's what his concern is, then you should also have to check the innards of the animal. Maybe the animal is a treifa. So the Gemara answers, Cheskat b'nei ma'im ksherim. Every animal has a presumption of not being a treifa. Every animal has the presumption of being kosher. So therefore, he was not concerned about the animal being a treifa. He was concerned about the animal becoming an avela, about the shochet messing up, not doing a good shechita, and that's why he said you cannot make a bracha. Okay, so what Yerushalmi seems to indicate is that if we would not have this cheskas kashrus, if we would not have this presumption that every animal is healthy, then we would have to make the bracha after checking to make sure that the animal is not a shechita. So that seems to indicate that if you shecht an animal that's not fit for consumption because, for example, it has a hole in its lungs, if you can somehow know, let's say through the x-ray, today we have x-ray machines, if somebody know through an x-ray that the animal has a hole in its lungs, then the Yerushalmi indicates that you would not make a bracha. Now this question actually came before Rashi, number 13 in your reference sheets, in the Or Zarua, in Ilchos Kisu Adam. He says, Bo Mais Lefnei Rashi. It was an incident that came in front of Rashi. Biyona Acha. There was a certain dove. Shenish Ba'agav. The wing of the dove was broken, and that created a real concern that maybe this dove is a treifa. So Rashi says, no, you shech the animal, and then you check, and you do whatever internal examination necessary to determine that this dove is not a treifa. Now, he asked Rashi, can you make a bracha? So Rashi says, yes, you can make a bracha, because even if the dove is not kosher, but you've definitely accomplished something by the shechita. Thanks to the shechita, this dove will not impart impurity. The shechita has accomplished nothing with regards to making it fit for consumption, but it has accomplished something that it will not impart impurity. So therefore, that accomplishment, that qualification that it no longer imparts impurity is enough to warrant a bracha. The Or Zarua says, no, I disagree. He's planning to eat the animal. His intention was shechting the animal so that he could eat it. And since the animal is not fit for consumption, you don't make a bracha. So says Reb Tzadok HaKohen very cleverly that in today's day and age, somebody goes to the mikveh to purify for keri, but he's not planning to go up to HaBayit. So according to Rashi, he would make a bracha, because it's accomplished something, even though that's not your intention, but that's what you've accomplished. Just like when you shecht an animal, and you're not planning to eat the animal, but you've accomplished something, now that the animal no longer imparts impurity, even though that was not your intention, according to Rashi, you could make a bracha. According to the Or Zarua, no, you cannot make a bracha. Because according to the Or Zarua, you have to intend to be going up to HaBayit. Just like when you shecht an animal, it may purify it from imparting purity, but if that's not what you're planning to do, you don't make a bracha. So that's a very clever comparison that Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen made. The Marshal, number 14 on your reference sheet, rules like Rashi, that says even if an animal is known to be a treifa, you make a bracha because it purifies it from imparting impurity. According to the Ramah and the Shach, number 15, they rule like the Or Zarua. So therefore, what comes out is that according to the Ramah and the Taz, if somebody goes to the mikveh to purify himself, if he's not planning to go up to HaBayit, he doesn't make a bracha. If he's planning to go up to HaBayit, he does make a bracha. According to the Marshal, something very interesting turns out. According to Rashi and the Marshal, every person that goes to the mikveh today, planning to purify himself from his keri, should make a bracha on the tefillah, even if he's not planning to go up to HaBayit. Because it has accomplished something. The fact that you do not intend to go up to HaBayit doesn't make a difference, which is actually the sheet of Rabbeinu Sadia Gaon. So it's an interesting thing. According to the Marshal, we should really be ruling like Rabbi Sadia Gaon, that every single time a person goes to the mikvah, he should be making a bracha because it qualifies him to go up to HaBayit. Now, clearly you see people aren't making a bracha when they go to the mikvah unless they're planning to go up to HaBayit. So clearly we don't rule like Rashi and the Marshal. Clearly we rule like the Arzarua, the Ramah and the Shach, that when you go to the mikvah, if your intention is to go up to HaBayit, you will be making a bracha. If your intention is not to go up to HaBayit, you will not be making a bracha. Okay, I refer you to number 16, 17, 18. On your reference sheets you can go, you can see some interesting points. It discusses whether if you have nobody to check every single shechita needs a bodek. Shub, some people have the last name Shub. Shub is the Rashi Tevis, is the abbreviation for shochet to bodek. An integral part of the shochet's job was also to check the internal organs of the animal to ascertain that the animal is not a treifa, that it's fit for consumption. What happens if there's no shochet to bodek available anywhere? So again, according to the Pri Chadash and according to the Tiferetz, you would not make a bracha on the shechita. It reminds me, I once went to a shir to Rav Asher Weiss. Rav Asher Weiss was discussing a halach of Erev Tafshilin. As we know, that when Yom Tov is on Friday, you need to make an Erev Tafshilin so that you can cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos. So Rav Asher Weiss brought the opinion of Rav Moshe Feinstein and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, that if you're not intending to do anything with your Erev Tafshilin, the Erev Tafshilin that you make on Thursday, so that you can cook on Friday for Shabbos, that Erev Tafshilin allows you to cook on Friday. What if you're not planning on cooking? So Rav Asher Weiss brought Rav Moshe Feinstein and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach that you should not make a bracha on the Erev Tafshilin. Rav Asher Weiss said, I strongly disagree with Rav Moshe Feinstein and Rav Asher Weiss. Rav Asher Weiss said, I strongly disagree with Rav Moshe Feinstein and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. He compared it to shechita. He says the shechita, if you're shechting an animal, even if you don't plan on eating, but if there's a shochet to bodek available, and it will make the animal fit for consumption, not that it's a treifa. It's fit for consumption, and there's a good chance that somebody might change his mind and he might eat it. As you'll see, number 16, that's the ruling of the Tfuah Char. Even if you're shechting the animal for the dogs, says the Tfuah Char, there in Siman Yutes, you make a bracha because you might change your mind. You shech the animal, it's kosher meat. You plan to feed it to the dogs, but you might change your mind and you might choose to give it to a human for consumption, so therefore you make a bracha. So says Rav Asher Weiss, it's the same thing. When I make an Erev Tafshilin, on Thursday, I'm not planning on cooking, but on Friday I might change my mind and I might decide to cook. So therefore I can make a bracha on the Erev Tafshilin. That is what Rav Asher Weiss wanted to say. I came to him after the shir and I debated with him a little bit. I said it's not the same because shechita changes the essential characteristic of the meat. The essential quality of the meat is changed. It went from being non-kosher meat to being kosher meat. So therefore you can make a bracha. Erev Tafshilin has no significance. All you do is you put aside, and you cook something on Thursday, you cook an egg and put aside a piece of matzah and you say this is Erev Tafshilin. Unless you plan on cooking, it doesn't make any inherent change. It doesn't change anything qualitatively. So therefore I had this little debate with him. Rav Asher Weiss said, I hear what you're saying, I know what you're saying, and I still disagree with you. But in any case, just an interesting side note, okay? So, the question is like this, okay? If somebody has had a seminal emission, he had relations with his wife, or otherwise he had a seminal emission, he wants to go up to HaBayit, we've made the case, it's very clear, you go to the mikvah and you make the bracha. You make the bracha before going into the mikvah. Some say you make the bracha after going into the mikvah. Ostensibly, it's really a machlokes between the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah. If you look in Hilchos Tefillah Reish Mem in Yardea, the Shulchan Aruch rules like the Rishonim, like the Rif, that you make the bracha before immersing yourself into the mikvah. The Ramah rules like the Bahag. The Bahag holds that you make a bracha after going into the mikvah. So I could say that it depends if you're Sephardi or Ashkenazi. So if you're Sephardi, you will probably be making the bracha before going into the mikvah. If you're Ashkenazi, you will be making the bracha after you go into the mikvah. You might do what the women do. You can go under the mikvah. It may be more advisable to come out of the mikvah, put on a robe. If the area is clean, if there's no bad smell in the room, then you can make a bracha. Okay? That is if you know that you've not been to mikvah since the last time you had a seminal emission, or if it's a woman, she has not been to the mikvah since the last time she stopped menstruating. Okay, so or if she has not been to the mikvah since the last time she gave birth, she would have to make a bracha on going to the mikvah. But now my question is, if somebody says, I'm not aware of having had a seminal emission since the last time I was at the mikvah. I went to the mikvah on Erev Yom Kippur 2-3 weeks ago. I'm not aware of having had any seminal emission since then. As far as I'm aware, I'm not a Balkari. Does he make a bracha in this situation as well? I think that the answer is no. And to prove my point, I'd like to go through some of the sources in your reference sheet. If you look at number 19, there's a Mishnah in Yuma, Daf Lamed Amud Aleph, that says that Ein Adam Nichnas Lazar Lavoid Afilu Ta'archi Yitbol. The Mishnah specifies that specifically when going into the Azara, one needs to go to the mikveh even if he is presumed to be pure. Okay, so the Mishnah makes it clear that the requirement to go to the mikveh is only for the area of the Beit HaMikdash, not for HaBayit. The indication of the Mishnah is that if you have no awareness of being Tameh, as far as you're concerned, you have not had a seminal emission since the last time you've been to the mikveh, then you don't need to go to the mikveh. It's only for the Azara. Now, if you look at the Gemara there, number 20 in your reference sheet, the point of going to the mikveh is an extra precautionary measure, so that when he goes to the mikveh, he will be reminded if he was Tomei. When one goes to the mikveh, he typically thinks, do I need this immersion or do I not need this immersion? So the need to go to the mikveh is an extra precaution measure to remind somebody if he forgot about having been Tomei. If you look at the Gemara there's a long discussion about the Tefillah, number 22 on your reference sheet. I'm not going to go through the whole Gemara there, but if you wish to on your own time, you can go through the Gemara there in Yuma, where the Gemara describes that in the Ezrat Nashim there was a certain room called the Lishkat HaMitzarayin, the chamber of the Mitzarayin, those that had Tzarat. What was the purpose of this room? That the Mitzorah would go to the mikvah, because he had to go close to the area of the Beit HaMikdash, area of the Azara. He had to stick his thumb into the area of the Azara, and the Mitzar would go to the mikvah. Now, there's a disagreement. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it was called Lishkat HaMitzara, but it was actually a misnomer, because the Mitzar didn't need to go to the mikvah, because as part of the purification of the Mitzara, he had to have gone to the mikvah on the 7th day. On the 7th day of his purification process, before he even made it to the Beit HaMikdash, he would be going to the mikvah. So if the Mitzar already went to the mikvah on the 7th day of his purification process, he doesn't need to go to the mikvah again on the 8th day of his purification process, when he came to the Beit HaMikdash to bring his karbanot, to bring his different animal sacrifices. The Chachamim disagree. The Chachamim say that no, it's just the opposite. The Mitzara needs to go to the mikvah. Other people do not need to go to the mikvah. It's the last 3 lines there, number 22 of your reference sheet. The Mitzara needs to, because since the Mitzara was Tameh, he tends to lack awareness about becoming Tameh. When one is in already a state of Tumah, he's less careful about becoming Tameh again. So therefore the Chachamim say that the mikvah in the Ezrat Nashim that was designated for the Mitzarim, the Mitzara had to go to the mikvah, even though he had already been into the mikvah on the 7th day. So what's very clear from the Gemara is that the Mitzara would go up to HaBayit without going to the mikvah. Only when he got to the area of the Azara did he have to go to the Beit HaMikdash again. And again, according to the Chacham, there was only a Mitzara who tends to be less careful about becoming Tameh. But other people don't need to go to the mikvah. So what you see very clearly from the Gemara is that you can go up to HaBayit if you have no known tumah. If there's no reason to suspect that you had a seminal emission, and you know that you've been to the mikvah since the last time you had a seminal emission, according to the Gemara, it's very clear you do not need to go to the mikvah in order to go up to HaBayit. However, I should emphasize that it's become very widespread practice to go to the mikvah before going up to HaBayit, which is actually a very good custom, because people may have forgotten that they had a seminal emission. It's a good habit. I encourage the habit. But strictly speaking, from the position of the Gemara, as you can see clearly if you like to go through the whole Gemara there, the Mishnah and Yuma Daf Lamed, they did not go to the mikvah for going up to HaBayit unless they knew that they had a seminal emission. Okay? So therefore my proposal is as follows. My position, I believe, from the Talmud is, if you're going up to HaBayit, if you have yet to been to a mikvah since the last time you had a similar mission, or you're a woman and you have not gone to the mikvah since the last time you stopped menstruating, or the last time you gave birth, you need to go to the mikvah and you need to make a bracha on that immersion. Otherwise, strictly speaking, you don't need to go to the mikvah. It's definitely a very good and encouraged practice that everybody should go to the mikvah. It's a good practice because people forget about these things. And you should go to mikvah without making a bracha. That's the position I'd like to assert humbly. But there's another point, and that's the Tosefta. I should really say the Mishnah and Mikvah. Look at number 23 on your reference sheet that will limit what I just said. Okay, the Mishnah and Mikvah Perched Mishnah Gimel says as follows: Hamahar b'layla. If somebody has a dream, what they call a wet dream, he's mahar b'layla. V'amad, he wakes up from his sleep. He finds that his flesh, the flesh of his organ, his male organ, is hot, tummy, then he's assumed to be a balkari. Even if he didn't find any semen, but if a person had a wet dream, then he's assumed to be a balkari. Okay? The Gemara needed Dafman Gimel Laman Aleph, number 24 on your list. So the Gemara clarifies with the Mishnah Mikvah. Men, Targum Rav Huna clarified, B'mishamish mitata b'chalom, he actually had relations with a woman in his dream. It's impossible that he had relations with a woman in his dream without having had some sort of emission. Okay? The Tosefta in Mikvod Perek Vav makes it even more clear that you need two conditions to assume that you're Baal Keri. Number one, you had relations in the dream, and number two, your flesh was hot. Right? A person woke up with, his organ was in such a state that one would expect after having had relations, or during having had relations. So that's what the Tosefta Mikvot says, that if he had relations with a woman, but he didn't wake up feeling his flesh was hot, or here, or let's say he woke up and his organ was hot, but he didn't have any hearer, he didn't have any dream about living with a woman, then he's assumed to be pure. So therefore, this is a very important point. Somebody can say, well listen, since the last time I was at the mikvah, I didn't have any seminal emission. But wait a minute, if at any point in time you had a dream that you had relations with a woman, and you woke up and your male organ was hot, then you will have the status of a balkari, and therefore you could make a bracha. Okay? If you look at the Rambam clarifies, codifies this halacha. Number 26 on your reference sheet. Somebody dreamt about having relations with a woman, even though you didn't find any semen. Right? Your tame came in. So therefore, that's already probably what happened is that there may be very little semen came out, or maybe the semen got absorbed in a person's garment or what have you, and that's why you didn't find it. But there's an assumption that the person is tamei. Okay, it's interesting if you look in your reference number 29 from the Rosh, 28 from the Rosh, 29 from the Meiri, number 30 from Avadi Bar Tanur. They all assert that it's a vadai. It means to say it's a certainty. If somebody had such a dream and woke up with his flesh hot, there's a certainty that he saw some carry, that he saw that some semen exited his body. Although, if you look at number 31, number 32, from the Rambam, the way the Meiser Keich explains the Rambam seems to say that it's not a certainty that he had semen coming out, but it's an assumption of the Chacham. The Chachamim said there's a high likelihood, a high probability that he had some seminal emission, so therefore we treat him as a balkari. If you look at number 31 on the reference sheet, the Rambam there says, Arai keri, etc., etc. And if you look at the third last line, it says, Kagoin maharher. He lists all the different cases where there's an obligation to go to the mikvah, and the Rambam lists when one needs to go to the mikvah because of a safek, because of not necessarily because of a certainty, but because of a high probability. One of those is a maharer. If somebody had relations in his dream, so the Meiser Keich there already infers from the Rambam that the Rambam held it's not a certainty that he has seminal emission after having had a dream of having relations with a woman, but it doesn't really make a difference because since the Chacham treated him as a balkari, so therefore he would certainly make a bracha. Even a rabbinic obligation mandates a bracha. For example, when we taivel glass, if you go to the mikvah and you immerse your glass vessels into the mikvah, you make a bracha. Now, there's no Daraita obligation to immerse glasses, because according to the Torah, it's only metal, as you see in the Parsha of Mochemet Midian, Parshas Chukas, I believe, I could be mistaken, Parshas, it's not in Chukas, Matos. There, the Torah talks about having to immerse the vessels from Mochemet Midian, only metal. But the Chachamim said that because metal could be melted and reshaped, glass has that same quality. Right? Glass is made from sand, you can melt it and reshape it. So the Chachamim added to the obligation of Tfilat Kelim glass as well, but you can still make a bracha. We do make a bracha on rabbinic obligations. So therefore, according to the Rosh and the Meiri and the Bartanura, there is a certainty that one is a Balkari, then certainly can make a bracha. There would be a chiyuv daraita to immerse into the mikveh after having had such a dream. But even according to the Rambam, right, we treat it as a certainty, the rabbis treat it as a certainty, and that's enough to mandate a bracha. And I compared it to a similar case. If you look at number 33 in your reference sheet, the Shulchan Aruch in Yeridea says, now there used to be a custom in the times of the Talmud, this halacha is brought in Shulchan Aruch, and there actually is a discussion in the poskim why we don't fulfill this custom in today's day of age, but the Shulchan Aruch rules that a woman who's a nida should have different clothing. Okay? So that she should have clothing that's miyuchad, that's designated to be worn when she is a nida. So if she's seen by her neighbors wearing these clothing that are designated for the days during which she's a nida, then she assumes the nida status. Chashiva kavadei tmea, because no woman, there's a chazakah, that no woman would put on clothing that's designated for the time when she's a nida unless she really is a nida. Okay? So you see that sometimes the Chachamim treated a woman as a nida because she wore the clothing because of an assumption. Or a similar case in Sif Gimel, Amr Labala, a woman tells her husband, Tmani, I'm a nida, we cannot be together. Then she changes her mind. She says, no, I'm really pure. And in a minute, she's no longer believed unless she gives an amatla or an amtalia, however you pronounce it. She has to give an explanation why she told her husband she was tamei. The Gemara there gives an example that Shmuel, the great Shmuel, the Amora, his wife, told him, I'm tamei, we can't be together. And then she changed her mind and she said, I'm actually pure. So Shmuel asked his wife, why did you say that you're a nida? She says, I didn't have strength to be with you tonight. I didn't want to upset you. Okay, so she made up an excuse. Right? She didn't want to have to fight. I guess she didn't want to have to fight with her husband about having relations that night. So Shmuel's wife said, I'm a nida, and that was the end of the story. That was a way that she would get out of having to have relations with her husband. Now the Gemara there says Shmuel was extra stringent and didn't live with her. He treated his wife as a nida. But there the Gemara says that Rav told him that according to Me'ikra Din, if a woman has an excuse as to why she told her husband she's a nida, then the husband could believe her. But if, let's say, she has no excuse, right? She tells her husband, I'm a nida, and then she comes back and says, no, I'm really pure. She's not believed. So there's an interesting question that's discussed by the Shud Rav Palim, the Ben Ish Chai, number 35 in your reference sheet. When this woman needs to go to the mikveh, she needs to go to the mikveh because she was wearing clothing that was designated for the days of being a nida. Or she has to go to the mikveh now because she told her husband she's a nida. But what if she knows she's not a nida? She has to go to the mikveh because of this obligation, because she had done something to cause her to be presumed as a nida. But she really knows that she's not a nida. She knows that she had no menstrual discharge. Could she now make a bracha on the tefillah when she goes to the mikveh? So the Rav Palim says, yes, she can make a bracha on the mikveh, even though she's not a nida. But because she is going to the mikveh because of a rabbinic obligation that said, under these circumstances, you need to go to the mikveh, that is enough to mandate an obligation to make a bracha on the mikveh. So it's the same thing. If somebody had a dream during which he had relations with a woman, he woke up and his flesh was hot, it makes no difference whether he really saw semen or not. The point is that under these circumstances, the Chachamim treated him as a fully fledged Balkari, so therefore he would need to make a bracha on the mikveh. So therefore, in summary, let me just repeat in summary, give an additional review of everything that we've said today. If somebody needs to go up, if somebody goes up to HaBayit because that's what he does, he's not stringent, or if somebody doesn't go up to HaBayit but he needs to go up to HaBayit because of Pekuach Nefesh, and he knows that he's a Balkari, he would have to make a bracha before going into the mikveh. If he was Sephardi, I would suppose, like the Shita of the Rif, or if he was Ashkenazi, he would make the bracha after coming out of the mikveh, like the Bahag. he would have, but in general, basically speaking, he would have to make a bracha on going to the mikvah. If he is a balkari, what does it mean being a balkari? Balkari means he had relations, or for a nocturnal emission, or for whatever other reason he had a seminal emission, or even if he did not have a seminal emission, but since the last time he went to the mikveh, he had a dream in which he had relations with a woman and he woke up and his flesh was hot, so then he would have to make a bracha on the mikveh. Otherwise, he would not need to make a bracha on the tefillah. Because again, we saw very clearly, the Gemara Numa, Daf Lamed, that if they had no reason to assume that they were a balkari, they would even go up to HaBayit without the mikveh. It's a strongly encouraged practice to always go to the mikveh before going up to HaBayit. But if somebody knows that he's not a balkari, then he would not need to make a bracha on the tefillah of going up to HaBayit. It's the same thing with a woman, right? If a woman has been to the mikveh since the last time that she was finished menstruating, then she would not need to have to make a bracha when going to the mikveh in order to go up to HaBayit. If she had not been to the mikveh since the last time she stopped menstruating, then she would make a bracha on the tefillah. If a woman is at an age where she's not menstruating anymore, then certainly she does not need to make a bracha. She may not even need to go to the mikveh at all, because she doesn't have to be... A man, there's a much stronger reason to go to the mikveh, because a man never knows if he may have had a seminal emission, or, it's much harder to keep track of these things. But if a woman is already an older woman, and she knows that since the last time she finished menstruating, she's been to the mikveh, and ever since she's never menstruated, then a woman is less of a reason, there's less of a compelling reason for her to go up to the mikveh as far as she knows that she's pure. And again, this all has to do with going up to the area of the HaBayit that's not part of the area of the Makam HaMikdash, but to go up to the area which is part of the Azara, which is an area of 187 by 135 amma. That area carries a karet punishment if somebody goes to that area, if he does it b'mezid. Even if he doesn't do b'mezid, it's still a very severe sin. He should not do that. There's an area of 135 and 135 in front of the area of the Beit HaMikdash of the Ezrat Nashim. There's a rabbinic prohibition against going into that area. If a person is a balkari, and if a person is a tamei meis, there's a rabbinic prohibition. And if somebody does need to go there, for whatever reason, pekuach nefesh, then there's an advantage not to be at full yaim, because the Yehoshaphat prohibited going into the area of the Ezrat Nashim whilst being a Tful Yoim. And again, right, as we discussed last week, I personally don't go up to HaBayit. I think there's a compelling reason not to go up to HaBayit, because we don't have Shomrim up there, and if anything could be accomplished, I strongly wish that they would put up Shomrim there, or at least they put up a fence, and that would preclude one of the main issues that the poskim have with people going up to HaBayit, because that was the complaints of the people after Korach had died. As we see in Parshas Korach, the people demanded that there should be Shomrim, and on that it would actually also be a fulfillment of one of the Taryag mitzvot. And if you do go up to HaBayit, I think that it's worthwhile to bear in mind what Rav Goren said, that there's an issue of lo tichanem. Lo tichanem means to say not to give our enemies a foothold in the land. And he said part of the reason of Goren said to go up to HaBayit, obviously after having gone to the mikveh when necessary, and obviously with taking a strong precaution that you don't go into the area of the Beit HaMikdash. It's in order to assert the Jewish sovereignty of HaBayit, that it belongs to us. And we are waiting the day that we replace the Dome of the Rock with a real Beit HaMikdash that should come speedily in our days. So we finished the whole topic of going up to HaBayit. Next week, there's also going to be a Zoom shiur. It's probably going to be given either from Toronto or Cleveland, and now North America. If anybody would like to have any suggestions about a certain halacha controversy that they'd like to hear, they can definitely get in touch with Rabbi Sam, or they can get my email, and they can email me if there's a special. I'm happy to take requests about certain halacha controversies if there's something, anybody that's interested. As a completion, the last series was on brain death, so we talked about organ transplantation from a brain dead patient. I wanted to complete the topic. I wanted to take a break from medical issues, but there was really another share that I wanted to give about live kidney transplants. Okay, I wanted to discuss, is it an obligation? Why is it, if it's not an obligation to give a kidney transplant, why isn't it an obligation? You can save a Jewish life. I'd like to give a shiur next week on live kidney donation. It'll be probably just a one shiur. I'll just probably give one shiur on this topic. I thank everybody for joining us on Zoom, and I hope to see you next week. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, have a good night. I see there's some 1 second. You can hang in there. I see some comments. Thanks, bye. Okay, sure. Fantastic. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Have a good night. For me, it's good afternoon. For you, it's a good night. Okay.